Hello, Wargamers. Welcome back to Mastering Mass Combat series of videos. Today, we are looking at part 2 of the Birthright system, which is the large-scale combat featuring hundreds or even thousands of combatants on a side. Last time, we talked about the skirmish battle system, which dealt with groups of combatants, approximately 200 or so, or less on a side. And today we have a little bit more complicated version, which I happen to have the RPG Sage along once again to help walk us through this process. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce the RPG Sage, and he is going to tell us a little bit about the pieces and rules that we use for this particular game.
Hello, thanks for having me. I'm always glad to be here. So, skirmish rules deal with combat between 20 and, say, 200 on a side. The war card system starts at 200 and goes up from there. Each of the pieces that we're going to be talking about represents about 200 or so. There's really no point in keeping track of exact numbers. Combatants in a unit that moves and fights together.
So you can see that the game is actually played on a battle map, which is laid out into 3 zones. 1 zone for the friendly side, 1 zone for the enemy side, and then a central battle area.
That's right. So you have 3 lines divided into 5 columns, and then a friendly and enemy reserve. During game setup, both sides will deploy their forces. The defender gets to deploy first, the attacker deploys second. Who's who? The defender is the army that was in place when the other guys arrived. So in this scenario, we're playing out the battle for the tomb of McMaximus from Mr. Wargaming. So that makes the Broman army, who got there a day early, the defenders. The orcs, who got there a day late, are the attackers. So the Bromans get to place their pieces first. Per Birthright rules, the defenders also get to place a terrain card, just one, appropriate to the province in which they're fighting. The map that Mr. Wargaming provided showed a tomb of interest and then a river card. So we've decided to fudge the rules a little bit and put both terrain pieces. So there are 2 kinds of terrain. The first and most interesting is a fortification. In Birthright rules, this would represent a castle or some kind of strong point from which defenders can rally. And typically, as you can see, it must be placed in the friendly line. But for our purposes, because this is an objective, we're putting it in the middle. And that's our fudge to the rules. Other than that, we're going to use it exactly as written. The first team to occupy it gets a slight advantage. All of the other types of terrain, rivers, bogs, forests, etc., all have the same general set of rules. They will apply a movement or combat modifier to fights that take place in that area of terrain. In this case, because the most salient feature of the battlefield appears to be the river, we put the river there. And as the defenders, the Bromans get to pick which way the terrain feature points in the case of one that has an orientation, like a hill. A hill or a river may have a steep side or a bank that makes it easier to cross in one direction and harder to go in the other. Their prerogative is to make it harder for the orcish forces to cross across that arrow. Okay, let's take a look at the actual units themselves. Birthright uses a system of war cards which depict melee, charge, and missile attack values with a defense value, and then some icons, which are used for resolving both morale checks and as a randomization factor for resolving the effects of 2 units in combat. After a lot of deep diving, we do not actually believe that this has any numerical relevance. It doesn't appear that swords or pennants or shields, which is the large icon in the center, have any bearing on the unit performance. It's just a randomization factor. So each unit has a move value, which is the number of areas or spaces on the board that it can move, and it may move in any direction except diagonal. Next, it has a defense value. Regardless of how it's being attacked, missile, charge, or melee, that is its defense value. Then it'll have a series of morale icons. We'll talk about morale a little bit more when we talk about battle cards. Next, they have a melee, or in some cases, a charge value. Charging is a special kind of attack that you get to make if you're allowed to move, or if you move at least one space prior to making your attack. If you are already engaged in combat with somebody, you cannot also make a charge attack that round. You have to use your melee. Next, we can see that these cards have rotation sides. It has 1 hit, 2 hits with reduced melee values as you go. This is to model the toughness of the unit. So a unit that has 3 hits can be rotated twice before it's destroyed. A unit that only has 2 hits can get rotated once before it's destroyed. That's the first way to destroy a unit, is by wearing it down via hits. The second way is if they're forced to rout or retreat, but can't because their line of retreat is cut off. Then they're destroyed automatically. Okay, so we've talked about how to resolve a fight. Well, how do we actually do that? With dice, right? No. Just like everything else with Birthright war cards, we use a card. They call it a battle card. And it has 2 columns of symbols for the attacker and defender, which are not the same as aggressor and defender. And then a row of results. So you compare the attack value of the attacker versus the defense value of the defender, compare their symbols. This is why we believe it's just a randomization element. Go across the table and find a result. A dash means a miss, nothing happens. An F means you failed the attack, and the attacking unit must fall back 1 space in any direction except toward the enemy. An H result is a hit. You will do a hit, and during the morale phase, the enemy card will rotate to show that it has taken a hit. Next is an R result, meaning that it takes a hit and is routed. It must retreat immediately 1 space and be destroyed if it has nowhere to go. And then next round, it must use its normal move to move directly into the reserve. Once it's in the reserve, every round it can try to make a morale check by drawing a battle card, looking at the big symbol, and determining whether or not it rallies if the symbol on the battle card matches any of the morale symbols on the unit card.
So we're going to go ahead and run this demonstration in the Roll20, and the RPG Sage was gracious enough to go ahead and set up this sample battle within the Roll20 system. And we'll actually make that public for y'all to go ahead, and if you want to get in there and play around with this, you're certainly welcome to do so. There will be a public link shared in the description below. And next up, our RPG Sage is going to give us a brief description of each side's forces.
All right. So, per the order of battle given to us by Mr. Wargaming, there is a slight disparity of forces between the the Roman forces, and the orcs. Uh, Unfortunately, because of Birthright's loose affiliation with numbers, that ends up not really mattering much. So we tried to model it as closely as possible by saying that since both the Broman and Orcish forces were composed primarily of heavy foot, we gave them infantry cards that have the same attack and damage values. Now, by a strange quirk, the Orc forces are a little bit tougher. They're going to be able to take 1 additional hit for a total of 3, compared to the humans 2. Hopefully, that will be offset by the fact that the humans with heavy horse have a much better and more powerful, more resilient cavalry force than the orcs, who have medium and light. As an example of what I mean by a loose affiliation with numbers, Mr. Wargaming says that the orcish forces have 200 medium horse and 150 light. That's 200 is exactly right for Birthright. 150 is basically 200. So we just kind of round that up to the nearest 200. And the same thing happened with infantry forces. That resulted in us giving the humans a total of 9 cards worth of infantry, and the orc forces a total of 8 cards worth of infantry.
All right. And just a quick note on this regarding the system itself. The birthright system is not what you would call system agnostic. It is heavily tied to the setting and definitely very thematic. If you are playing the birthright campaign setting in your Dungeons and Dragons game, I think it would be extremely interesting because it is so highly thematic, but it does make for a bit of extra time and paperwork if you wanted to convert this to another system. So we will keep that in mind for the review at the end. So let's see here. So we've got our live view on the Roll20 screen. And I believe since the orcs are the aggressors, that they'll get to move first. Is that correct?
That's correct. But why don't you, as the humans, deploy your forces? So
Ah,
while he's doing that, I'll describe a little bit about how setup goes. The defender and attacker roles within Warcards are different from the aggressor and defender roles within the larger domain struggle context. Birthright says that the aggressor is the person who holds more enemy territory than the other guy. Um, and for this purpose, the attacker is the person who arrived late to the party. That means the defender gets to set up their forces first, choosing to keep some or all in their reserve and committing at least one unit to the friendly line, but no further. After they deploy forces, then the attacker gets to deploy their forces. Subsequent to that is the actual movement phase. And in the movement phase, the attacker has the initiative. So the defenders get to set up first, and they get their choice of terrain, which we've already done, and placement. And then the attackers have to cope with whatever was set up. But the choice of the privilege of initial movement is theirs.
all right. So what I decided to do was spread out the cavalry a little bit in the center and to the left flank, and then support those cavalry with infantry forces, and decided to go ahead and put some infantry right here next to the river so that they would be able to move in and snatch this objective closer to the end. And I kept one infantry unit back in the reserve section as a reserve.
Now, why did you leave one in the reserve? What's the benefit of that?
The infantry or any units that are in the reserve are actually able to enter the smaller boxes. They can choose any one of those. So they have 5 areas that they can move into to support additional units in the future if and when there are casualties to be taken. Also, I decided to keep one back, although I was thinking about doing two, but I'm just going to keep one um, in order to prevent any kind of breakthrough. They can jump in and help prevent the encirclement or flanking on getting destroyed on a route.
Excellent. Okay. I, on the other hand, have, in true orcish fashion, committed all of my forces. And I've chosen to put my cavalry basically in the center. I don't want to be trapped by that river card, but neither do I want to be completely defenseless there. I want to leave myself some place to go if my forces get routed. And then I chose to commit to the left flank, the or what is my right flank if I were sitting at the table opposite, uh, in order to directly advance to that objective. Okay, I think we're ready. Let's play around.
All right, let's do it. So as the aggressor, the orc forces will go first.
Yep, that's right. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is look at my movement. And I see that my infantry have moved 1, and my light cavalry have moved 3, my medium horse have moved 2. So I'm going to advance all of these guys, all of my infantry up 1 unit. Now I can't cross that river. The close-up of the river card says movement. A river prevents movement between the area containing this card and the area pointed to by the arrow. And if a unit is routed or forced to fall back toward the arrow, it's considered to be destroyed. And then my cavalry, I'm going to just advance them directly into contact. 1 and 2. 1 and 2. Now, how far can I move? Well, in addition to the movement listed on the unit card for how far I can move, I cannot cross through an enemy occupied space. If there are any enemies in the space, I cannot cross in and occupy that without fighting. So now I have moved 2 units in, both cavalry. And that means that the defenders of that square, the Bromans, are going to need to decide whether they're going to stand and face the cavalry or if they're going to voluntarily fall back 1 square. And if they're not going to fall back, then they need to choose how many of their units to engage. How many do you have to engage? You have to engage at least as many enemy units, at least as many friendly units as enemy units who entered your square. So
Right.
2.
You can't leave anyone who entered the square unengaged.
Right. But that's going to leave you with at least 1 unengaged unit. And you will then have the choice of either committing that as well to the battle or moving it.
Right. But I also get to do my movement phase before we do the combat phase.
That's correct.
So this is where it'll be exciting, and I think will expose a little bit of my strategy. Are you all set? All done
Yep.
moving?
I'm done moving.
So what we'll do is these 2 infantry units will engage there. Then these 2 will engage here. And these 2 units can move into the river section.
Yes, they can.
So they'll move there, which in the future, ideally, will prevent a route in that direction. In addition, we'll bring up both units of heavy cavalry. We'll bring up 1 unit of heavy cavalry there, and then 2 units of infantry here. All right, I think that'll do it for the movement phase.
Okay. Next, we move into the attack phase. So there's normally resolve magic first. Well, neither side has spellcasters. Resolve missile attacks. Neither side has any bowmen. It's just going to be melee. So the next phase is charge. So I have 2 cavalry units that have moved at least 1 space before engaging the enemy, and therefore they are going to use their charge attack. Now I see that both of my cavalry in the friendly center are opposed by 2 engaged units. And it's not clear to me, and maybe this is something we want to roll back and edit out, because it's not clear to me that that actually matters. It doesn't seem to me that that helps you, other than giving you more forces here to continue the fight.
I think all that happens is If that unit gets routed and doesn't get a chance to attack, the second unit then can go ahead and attack.
I would agree with that.
So I think that's the benefit.
Okay, so I'll pick up at the top of my narration.
Nah, leave it in. Leave it in. I think this will be good.
Okay. Well then, so I've got 2 cavalry that charged in. So they're going to use their charge values against your defense values. Now it looks like that's all the same infantry. So that's going to be my charge of, with this leftmost fight. That is that an old picture? The same thing. That's my cavalry. That's going to be charge 5 versus your defense of 3. So I'm going to draw a war card. Sorry, a battle card. So my charge of 5 versus your defense of 3 means that I'm at +2. So I'm going to use this column. And then we compare symbols. I'm swords and you are shields. So sword versus shield. That result is a D. The defending unit is destroyed.
All right. Move them over here.
Well, before you move him away, remember that attacks are simultaneous. So your unit will be destroyed during the morale phase, but it still gets a chance to return its attack.
Oh, yes. All right, so then, okay, so let's just change their hit points to 0 then. Yeah.
Sounds good. Just as a reminder to ourselves. Now you get the chance to counterattack.
Well, do you want to attack with all of your cards first, and then we'll do all the human cards?
Sure. All right, next, my medium horse with charge 6 versus your infantry with defense 3, so that's +3. So I draw a new battle card. So I'm going to be using the +3 column. My cavalry are shield versus yours are swords. So that's this pairing here. And H, defending unit takes 1 hit. All right. Next up, we've got 2 infantry fights, 3 versus 3. So that's going to be ±0. So we draw a new card. It's 0. So this first fight on the left is Pennant versus Sword. And that's a hit. Defending unit takes 1 hit. All right. Next, center fight. Same thing. Pennant versus Pennant. Defending unit takes a hit. And lastly, I am attacking with infantry versus your cavalry. So I'm going to use my melee value of 3 versus your defense value of 5. That puts me at a disadvantage of -2. So I draw a new card. I look at -2. I'm shield versus pennant. -2 shield versus pennant. Wow, I still managed to get a hit in.
Wow.
Defending unit takes 1 hit.
All right.
And I believe that's everything for me.
So that's all of your attacks. All right, so I'll start over here on the left. And this one, we have our infantry with melee 3 versus your defense 3.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a sword, and you have a pennant. So that'll be an R.
Ooh. Defending unit takes 1 hit and is routed. This will be fun.
And
So I'm
again,
just
we
going to...
have... Oh, you know what? Yeah. That wasn't right. I made a boo-boo. This guy has a hit, so he's actually going to be at melee 2 versus your defense. Or no, we're doing the right. We're doing it.
You were correct. This is
Okay,
one of the
excellent.
common
That's
problems, and thanks for illustrating that so that we can talk
so
about it.
again.
Because
So
if you
yeah.
do
So three
this,
versus three again. We'll draw a battle card, and it is Pennant versus Pennant at 0, which is F.
attacking unit falls back.
So
Now, which direction do you have to fall back? You can fall back in any direction except toward me.
which would mean I cannot go to my right. I can go down to the left. Right? You can't go diagonal.
Correct. You cannot move diagonally,
So
and you can't move forward.
this
You
infantry.
can't move to your right because that'll put you in contact with me and you'd be destroyed. But
So
you
they're
can
going to
go
go ahead
back.
and move over here. If they've completed their
Yep,
attack.
that looks good.
And this one is the heavy heavy horse. So they have a charge of 7 versus your defense.
Of 3.
So we'll draw a new battle card. That is -3 or less. And that's Pennant versus Shield.
As the attacker, you're at +3.
I'm sorry, yes, +3. Pennant versus Shield at +3 or higher is R. So you'll take 1 hit and be routed.
Makes perfect sense.
Then we're going to get to do this twice down here. Each of these infantry units is melee 3,
Hmm.
and this is your medium.
Correct. This is my, oh, sorry, this is my light horse
That's the light horse. All right, so your
here
defense
with a
is
defense
3.
of 3.
So 3 versus 3. Once again, that's a 0. Draw the battle card. And it looks like it is shield versus swords. That'll be an R for a route.
1 hit and rout.
And then the second one,
Wow. These orcs have terrible morale.
3 versus 3 again.
And that's still against this light horse because you've engaged 2 units there.
Correct. And again, this is now Pennant versus swords, which will be an H. Defending unit takes another hit.
Okay. So they're actually going to be destroyed because they will have taken 2 hits this turn.
Okay, so we will each have lost one of those war cards. Excellent. So now for the last of the matchups, my wounded dudes here, they draw a card, and again, it's we're doing now. This is your medium.
Correct. My medium horse have a defense of 4.
That's a 4, so that'll be a -1 result. And it looks like sword versus pennant. Is that correct, or is that no? It's sword versus shield.
Correct. Sword versus shield.
That -1 is no effect.
Okay.
And then here we have the same battle, but now it is sword. Again, it's sword versus shield. We draw a new battle card. It should have a different result, ideally. And sword versus shield, -1 is an H, so you're going to take a hit.
Excellent.
And so this unit here is destroyed.
Yeah. So now let's look at the morale phase. We finished making our charge attacks. We finished making our melee attacks. Now, the last phase would be a moving missile. If anybody with a missile rating had moved, they could still take a shot. since we don't have any missile troops this phase that are in this battle, then we're going to skip that. And that brings us to the morale phase. Morale phase is basically the cleanup. Anyone who was routed needs to recoil one area immediately. So I have 2 troops over here in this big, in the middle left center. These 2 troops both need to recoil 1, and I'm going to pull them in here where I have a friendly force kind of holding the ground. But they are also routed, so next turn they're going to need to move directly toward the reserve. They cannot attack until they pass morale, but they can still be attacked and use their defense values. They've also each taken a hit, so I'm going to take this time now to rotate them to show that they have taken 1 hit. All right. And this unit of mine was destroyed. This unit needs to get rotated to show that it's taken a hit. And I think that's everybody.
And this one needs to be rotated as well. Let's do 9.
So for everybody watching at home wondering if this system is fast and easy to play, I will note that it has been my experience that the additional clicking and dragging and typing and setting involved in playing with any kind of virtual tabletop is like sand in the gears. It just makes everything grind a little bit harder.
Yeah, if we were playing this face to face, it would we would already be done, I think, because you can just grab the cards and spin them.
Absolutely. All right.
Okay, so that's the end of the first round.
Yep, that's the end of the first round.
And so now your orcs will be able to move once again.
Yep, so top of the second round, now I need to move. So my orcs all have move 1, and these guys were routed. That's why I put the little dot on them to remind me that they had been routed. And they need to move directly toward the reserve. If I had been thinking clearly, I would have moved them straight back last time so that they'd be 1 round away from the reserve, but that's orcs for you. I'll move these guys up to occupy the objective and reinforce the center. And these guys are engaged. They were engaged last time, although I think they've defeated their opponent, so they might be free to move this time. But I'm going to stick it out here because I don't think I have much choices.
Well, you could fall back, and you wouldn't have to fight in this particular round. But that is infantry, so it's not like they get a bonus. I think staying there is probably their best bet because I do have cavalry there that will not be able to use a charge bonus this round.
Yeah, that's probably the best thing I can do is choose to engage your cavalry. Now, interestingly, you outnumber me here, and as a special rule of Warcards, cavalry cannot be forced to engage by infantry. They can only be forced to engage by other cavalry. So you could voluntarily fall back 1 instead of engaging the infantry. That would leave them disengaged and ready to move, and choose to engage me with your wounded infantry. But that might not be a great plan because this is a full health orc unit.
Right.
At any rate, that is my movement for the phase.
Okay. Outstanding. The this infantry unit here, they were just fall back, correct? They were not routed.
Correct.
So they do not have to move towards the reserve line. So I think what I will do is move them here. cavalry is going to go ahead and engage with these orcs here. Likewise, this engage with the orcs there.
I mean, you could just doggy pile.
So we have all three of those units engage the orcs. And then these horsemen here move 1, 2.
Now, it might be interesting for you to move to the center to engage my routed units. They can't attack you, so you would get a free attack against one of them and maybe try to do some more damage. You wouldn't be able to
I can't
destroy
move
one
to
this
the.
turn.
I can't move to this box because no one can reach that.
Okay.
Right, and
Thought you had one more
this
move.
cavalry here, they can't move past this orc, correct?
You could choose to not be engaged by them. Because those cavalry were not that orc's opponent. And cavalry cannot be forced to engage by infantry.
So they can advance. Well, if they can advance, then they are.
Well, they can move. They can recoil to any direction except forward.
Okay, so then they can. Yeah, okay.
Instead of making a normal move. So basically, I have moved my orcs to challenge your horsemen. Your horsemen can give battle, or they can decide not to give battle and to voluntarily recoil 1 square. And the valid squares of advance for them to recoil would be to your left or to your rear. They can't move to your right because I occupy
Right.
that.
So there's no one they can. So they can't engage these routed forces. Is getting at.
Yeah.
So these routed forces, as of this turn right now, they are safe.
Oh, good. I played that smartly.
So let's see here. We have a unit of heavy horse here.
I think that was my cavalry you moved. Because I moved both of my cavalry up here through the center. If I blow that up, yeah, that's knights. That's my medium horse.
Oh, okay.
So you got to leave somebody there to
So I
fight
have
me.
to leave. Okay, so I'll leave all of my infantry here because they to engage those. So you had both of your cavalry. So those are your cavalry. Okay.
Yeah.
They're okay. Okay. That's the difficulty of these cards being up. How'd you turn that red?
There's a setting in Roll20 where you can modify the tint of the token, and I'm just going to tint all of Op4 red.
So is this your unit here?
Which guy?
This one.
No, that's you. That's your wounded infantry.
Okay, so they are not going to engage. So here's what's going to happen. We're going to do this. So they'll stay there. He's going to move here. Okay. Now it makes more sense. Okay. Outstanding. Let's go ahead and go ahead and make your attacks.
All right. So let's start with his infantry. Now he didn't move, and he wasn't free to move this turn, so he cannot charge. That leaves him with just his melee rating. That's my medium horse, I believe. So that gives him a melee rating of 4 versus your defense rating of 3. So that's going to be a +1 for me. So that's this column over here. And I'm shields. Oh, he's wounded. He's on 1 hit. So his melee rating is 3 versus your defensive 3. So that's actually +0. Shields versus, let's do top to bottom. Shields versus Pennants.
Yep.
And that's +0. So nothing. I attack to no particular purpose. Okay, next up, I've got one unit here that needs to fight, and that is Uninjured Infantry with melee 3 versus your Injured Horse with defense 5. Good lord. So that puts me at -2, which is this column, and I am Pennant versus Pennant. F, attacking unit falls back. So I will need to fall back 1 during the morale phase. And I think that's the only place we've got a matchup this round.
Yeah.
All right.
So here,
over to you.
We'll draw a battle card. That is 3 versus
4.
4.
My defense is 4.
I'll be the -1. And it's Pennant versus Shield. There's no effect. No, I did it wrong. It's this one here. H. Defending unit takes 1 hit.
All right. That was the cavalry, correct?
Right, well, yeah, this one.
Excellent. Yep, perfect.
So they've done their attack. This infantry, draw their battle card. It's 3 versus 4, which is -1. This time it's swords versus shield, which is another hit.
All right, so this unit is destroyed. Or will be.
Here,
Mm-hmm.
we have our cavalry, melee 5 versus defense 3. So that'll be a +2. That's Pennant versus Pennant.
Correct.
That'll be R. You are routed, sir.
Oof, take 1 hit and be routed. Gracious me.
Have this cavalry with a pennant. No, I'm sorry, infantry with a pennant. Versus your infantry. So that's 3 versus 3, is that correct?
Correct. My defense is 3.
So 0, pennant, pennant. The defender will take a hit.
Getting worn down here.
And then the last one will be Pennant versus Pennant at 0 once again. And that'll be no effects.
All right.
And now we can see the fun part about the multiple cards for randomization. So even though it was Pennant versus Pennant twice, we had different results.
Yeah. And we'll talk a little bit about alternate ways to randomize outcomes at the end of the video. All right, so in the cleanup phase here, it looks like I've got 1 unit that needs to recoil and route. So it looks like the only safe direction for me to go is to recoil this way, ceding the field to you, and setting me up for another retreat. And this cavalry unit is destroyed. All right, that's the end of that. Turn 2 is over.
All right. And so that is... All right, round 3. Let's see what happens.
All right, so movement. I have the privilege of moving first. The first thing I'm going to do is get these guys to safety in the reserve. Now that they have moved into the reserve, they are going to need to make morale checks every round. Morale checks are used by drawing a war card. Now it says, look at the large icon on the card that is drawn, but I haven't noticed any large icons on any of these cards. Maybe it was something that was originally in color and these were scanned in black and white, something like that. But these don't appear to have any icons. So
large icon.
Yeah, that's what it says. Oh, they might be referencing the actual war cards, like the unused unit cards that came with the box set. Draw one at random, and if the large icon on the card matches any of the small icons, then the unit rallies. That seems needlessly complicated, but since you've got all the cards printed out, I'll let
I
you.
did print out all the cards because I'm crazy. So they are pretty effectively shuffled, I think, because I was trying to pull them out earlier. So I will go ahead and flip one over. And this is number 85, Warband of Markazor. Large icon is a pennant.
Okay, I do not rally on a pennant, so next turn we'll try again.
All right, and the second unit, number 67, Goblin Archers, pennant.
Phew, no rallying for me. Okay, so that's those guys. Last turn, this unit in the middle routed. He recoiled one area. Now he needs to use his move to retreat directly. His only option is to move back one, where I'm sure he'll be destroyed by your marauding cavalry. Now, with that out of the way,
We can always hope.
the rest of my movement is going to be spent coming in to occupy this river, since I can cross it from this direction. Now, the river terrain card has an effect. If a unit is routed or forced to fall back toward the area next to the arrow, it is considered to be destroyed. So if I have to fall back in this direction, then those units will be destroyed. So if I need to fall back, I need to fall back here, which now you can see why I secured that objective, or here, but that would put me in danger. That's the only effect of the river terrain card. So we're going to have two fights here on the river, and I'm going to leave the rest of my forces occupying the tomb.
All right. So for the human movement, these knights will move here, charge those routed columns. Then I will move my other infantry here. I have 3 of them. This unit here. These 2 will move.
It looks like you still have one in your reserve. Are you ready to commit him to battle?
I am. We are going to move.
Very wise.
All right, so that is the movement phase.
All right. So in the attack phase, we've got 2 fights here, and those are both full strength orc companies versus full strength human companies. So that's both attack 3, defense 3. So those are going to be +0, I believe. So let's draw a card. Okay, 0. And that's the first matchup is Shield versus Pennant, which is nothing. And same thing again, draw a new card. +0, Shield versus Pennant, nothing.
Ooh.
What a waste.
Nice. All right, so that's exciting. So my heavy knights have a charge of 7 versus your defense of 3.
Correct. Even though I have suffered injuries, my defense remains 3.
And it appears to be pennant versus pennant.
On the +3 or more. So defending unit takes 1 hit and is routed, but it only had 1 hit left, so it's going to be destroyed.
And because they're routed, they won't be able to fight back. Is that correct?
No, yes, because they are routed from last turn. Because they're still retreating from last turn.
They're routed.
Yeah, they do not get to make an attack. If you had only just now routed them, they would still get to make their attack, and they would rout during the morale phase. But because they were routed last turn and are currently retreating toward the reserve, they cannot counterattack.
Right, and then here, infantry versus infantry, that'll be 0.
Mm-hmm.
It looks to be pennant versus shield.
Correct.
And that is going to be a hit.
Sheesh. Everything's coming up humans these days.
For the second battle there, we have shield versus shield at 0. No effect.
All right. Okay. That's the end of the engagement. So now we clean up. You destroyed one of my units, so I pull him off the board. And nobody else routed or was forced to recoil, so that's the end of that. And we'd be at the top of turn 4 if we wanted to continue.
All right, we are at about 55 minutes.
The real problem for the humans is that by occupying the Tomb of McManus, maybe the orcs have already won this scenario. Each round or each turn of warcard combat is 5 rounds of skirmish or man-to-man combat. As you may recall from the first Birthright video, skirmish fights take place in the same time scale as regular 1-to-1. And as a result, 5 man-to-man rounds have passed for each warcard round that we fought. We've had 3 rounds now, so that's 15 rounds over a turn of time that the orcs have been occupying the Tomb of McManus. Sorry, McMaximus. Depending on what the MacGuffin is that's in that tomb that the men and orcs are fighting over, maybe they have already retrieved it. The DM would need to be keeping track of this kind of time and know whether the orcs would have had time to achieve their objective. Maybe it was something that they wanted to destroy or an item that they wanted to use that would have taken negligible time to do so. Maybe they've had time to do it, and the humans, though obviously victorious on the battlefield, are now forced to contend with the results of that destruction. Or maybe whatever's down there is something that takes a lot more time to use, in which case the humans first have to mop up the orcs. And at the top of round 4, my movement would be to retreat all of my orc infantry into the tomb and hold up there. And kind of hold you off so that my leaders have the chance to do whatever it is that they're doing down there. And then the
Now,
humans
would
have to.
those 2 orcs that you just moved, though, would those 2 orcs be able to disengage from that battle?
Oh, that's a very good question. No, they would not. They would be stuck here. They're engaged in combat. So they
And
would
if
have to
they
stay here
get
and fight it
routed
out.
or have to fall back, they would be able to move into the tower.
Right. Unless they were routed
Because
or recoiled, then no. So that's a good catch. Thank you. But I've got these guys here sitting on the objective doing whatever it is that they're doing. And the
and they
DM
may
would need
have
to
been
keep
able
track of
to, yeah, like you said, they may have been able to retrieve the item. The girdle of McMaximus, I believe, is what's in there.
that. Okay. So in 15 rounds, in a turn and a half, would they have had time to retrieve it?
Yeah, and that's a great question. And
And then, having made their way to the surface, their objective changes to escape. And then we designate, for example, one unit that might have the crown, or the girdle rather, and that's the unit that possesses the item. That's the one you have to destroy, and the one that I have to protect at all costs. So you can see that there's room in the rules for resolving these combats for scenario based play. It doesn't just have to be a slogfest.
oh, absolutely. And I think it's also really fun that theoretically, the while this battle is evolving, we're you've got 1.5 turns in the tomb there. We could pause the war card game and move down to a more tactical level and assume that there are possibly characters or NPCs with that orc forces that are penetrating the tomb itself, while the guards, as it might be, would be guarding the outer edge, and then they would have, you know, a limited amount of time to attempt to retrieve the item. Because on the human turn, at the top of 4, these 2 units would theoretically be able to assault the temple and have to fight against the remaining guards.
Absolutely. And one of the war cards that we didn't use is just titled Adventurers. And you can attach the Adventurers war card to any other unit to represent the player party. And then the mission becomes deliver the players to the tomb. Okay, mission accomplished. And you can then, if you're at the table, set all of this to one side and run 5 rounds of exploration and dungeon delving, and then pause, go back and do a turn, come back. And so you're switching perspective between what's happening underground in the tomb and what's happening above ground. And maybe it becomes a chase. Maybe the orcs have been here for a turn and a half and the humans now have to catch up. That could be interesting. That could be a hell of a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. This is this it's interesting the research that we did in preparing for this really opens up some more questions really than get answered. And I definitely want to do more research into this setting and this campaign system, just in and of itself. I think it's extremely interesting. And I'm kind of sad that I wasn't really paying attention when it was released back in the day. So, yeah, I think we should go ahead and look at wrapping it up here. We've got to just about an hour, and
All right.
we don't
And I'm
want to
sure it'll
be
be less
here
than
all
that once
day.
it's edited.
What's that?
I'm sure it'll be less than that once it's edited.
A little bit, yeah, hopefully. So let's go ahead and do our review and analysis. This is going to be a new feature that we'll be adding to the end of the videos, where we'll talk about 5 or 6 different points regarding the qualities, not quality, but qualities of the various systems. So, number one, how wargamey is it? I'm going to give this actually a 4 in terms of wargaminess because if we were playing in real life, I think it would be much more tactile and really feel like you were playing a war game much more so than say the Conan 2D20 or the Rule Cyclopedia versions. What say you?
I give this either a 3 or a 4. I think the combination of discrete units that have their attack and defense values, terrain modifiers, constrained movement, all come together to make this a pretty strong war game, especially when combined with the rules that we have for how missiles fire, how charges take place. My concern is that at the 120 to 240 person company scale, you're really losing a lot of the fiddly bits of miniatures wargaming with models. And because the movement is limited to orthogonal movement on this field, your movement is especially constrained. And those one move units have very few options compared to something like chainmail, where you have, say, 6 inches of move and you can move those any combination of 6 inches or in any direction. So you lose some flexibility and some control, but you retain, I think, a lot of the spirit of what makes a war game.
Yeah, definitely. I think if you were playing this with a sort or if you wanted to compare this to a miniatures game, it would be something more like a 2 millimeter or 3 millimeter scale game, on that regimental scale where you're not really doing the kind of skirmish and more individual base style combat that those war games include. How well do you think this would work as a standalone war game if you just threw down a scenario and duked it out?
Bad. Because it's so tied into the setting of Cerealia and the Birthright box set, um, it it is heavily dependent on that. But if you could separate that and just use it sort of generically, or if you were more comfortable writing your own war cards, then I think it would work pretty well. The attack, defense, charge, missile, and hit values are already pretty abstract. But I think if you're at that point, you're probably already looking for a more concrete war game.
Yeah, definitely. I think that as a standalone, I think it works better as a board game than as than calling it a war game
I would agree with that.
on a standalone basis. Let's see here. How would this work as theater of the mind? I think right off the bat, immediately you can say it won't.
Yeah, there's no way. You have to model this. You have to use the battle mat, whether it's the one that came in the box, which we have attempted to faithfully recreate on screen for the viewing public, or whether it's something you put together with hex paper. You have to have some way, some grid system for moving these cards.
Definitely. And that leads us right into how easy is this to set up to do a battle like this in the middle of a session? And once again, I think the answer to that is not very. This would get a one, I think, on a scale of 1 to 5 in terms of setup and execution during a session.
I actually give it a 2. And the reason I think it's slightly more usable than that is that you can and should be doing all of this bookkeeping in advance. So if you've got an idea of, the Broman Fifth Army, then you already know what war cards are part of that army, and you've already set those aside in a deck box labeled Broman Fifth Army. And then when that army engages, you just open up that box and there's your cards. So it can seamlessly move in at the table if and only if you've done your homework in advance. However, that score drops down to a 1 if you're moving away from the setting of Birthright and Cerealia. The further you move away from Birthright, the more paperwork it takes in advance to model this correctly. From choosing which cards to use or making your own cards, you're looking at another layer of bookkeeping that has to happen before you can play. But once you've done that, you're golden. You can just get out your deck and play.
Right, and that's a fair assessment because definitely a war or a combat of this scale involving literally thousands of combatants is not something typically that would come up just in the middle of a session. Your party wouldn't stumble onto necessarily a battle like this taking place.
Right.
And let's see here. What's the next question? How well does it integrate with the D&D core rules? I would say in one respect it would get 5 out of 5 for being perfectly designed to integrate with this particular AD&D setting. With other editions of D&D, probably I would have to knock that down to a 4 just because you'd have to do some work in advance to, again, customize the war cards to your own personal setting.
Yeah, I'd give it a 4 overall at that as well. The reason being that there's already a level of differentiation between the D&D stats for creatures and characters and their war card representation. So you're already one layer of abstraction away. It's not like you can take those values and directly plug them in the way that you could with Birthright skirmishes, where those values are directly what's used in skirmish.
And the last question when it comes to our review is how difficult would this be to integrate with any other open source rule game or other fantasy role playing system? And I think is the farther you get away from the basic, I don't mean the basic, but the core idea of the Dungeons and Dragons rule system, the more difficult it would be.
Right. The less that this will make sense. So the further and further you get away from AD&D 1 or 2, the less sense this will make. For example, if you're playing a fantasy role-playing game that doesn't model charge bonuses, then the different charge value versus melee is not going to make much sense. Similarly, if you are playing in a setting which might theoretically have that, but it's low fantasy where you don't have knights on horseback and it's just people riding horses into battle and then dismounting, dragoon style, then that's also not going to make much sense. So you'd have more work on your hands to convert this.
All right. Well, overall, I'm going to give this system a score of 4 because it is intriguing, and especially in a real life situation, I think it would move very quickly. The war cards make things move amazingly quickly, and I definitely think that, especially if you don't have a large miniature collection and you're not really a miniatures or wargamey type of gamer, that this type of mass combat would fit very easily into a system. However, it would definitely need to be customized for your personal campaign.
I agree. And if we have time, I'd like to real briefly talk about that.
Yes, please do.
So there are two things to keep in mind if you're going to be customizing this to your game. First is if you have or can get a copy of the Birthright, or sorry, the battle system rules for AD&D or AD&D 2, there are guidelines in those books for taking your D&D unit statistics and translating them into battle system statistics with attack dice and defense dice and so on. Then there is an article called Cry Havoc that appeared in Dragon Magazine Annual Number 2 from 1997 that will walk you through converting battle system units into Birthright Warcards. And even if you're not using battle system, that will give you a general idea of how to convert an honest to God miniatures war game set of statistics into war cards and how that's modeled and represented. So that article would be absolutely invaluable to somebody looking to customize this system to their own setting or their own rule set. The second thing is the war card system is cool and we like it, but it's also needlessly complex and there's uh, then you have to be careful about always randomizing which icons you're giving and all of that, and it's a little weird. So this table was produced by rpg.net user Thane of Fife, who did a deep dive into this and did the math on it and said this is what he thinks the cards were trying to model. 9 possible results based on your differentials, and then they just put them in a different order to mix it up as far as symbol matchups. He suggested that instead of drawing the cards from a deck and constantly recycling them, that you could just roll a die. Roll a d10, on a 10, roll again. Anything else, consult the table and look at the differential. And that still prioritizes both high rolls and high differences between attack and defense to get good results.
All right, excellent. Well, I think this gives us lots of food for thought. I look forward to the comments down below. So if you're watching and you've stuck around this long, thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it. Uh, Thank you also to the RPG Sage for the work that you did in putting together this Roll20 format, which is amazing. And I look forward to hearing again more feedback from folks if they want to get in and play with it a little bit and use it and see how it works. Um, yeah, I definitely am going to do more research into the birthright system. The setting as a whole, the campaign setting as a whole, I don't think it was used as much as it could have been, and I'm really surprised that it doesn't have more of a presence in the discussion that you see online these days.
Right, especially with so many people bringing up the sort of core bro SR concept of giving domains early. That's Birthright's whole shtick. 1995, they were saying, what if we gave domains to level 1 characters and made them the prince regents or the rulers of their kingdoms and gave them the opportunity to interact on the diplomatic stage and as dominion rulers and deal with those complexities and not just go slay giant rats. And I think that that's become central to the discussion about what is Dungeons and Dragons and how do we extract maximum fun from it. And so few people have heard of this setting that I think it just gets missed.
That's really unfortunate. So, in any case, here we are, folks. Birthright campaign setting. The mass combat system is cool and is very user friendly. However, it will take some preparation work in order to make it effective in your campaign. Thank you once again for watching. Hit subscribe and share this video with your friends and neighbors and join in the discussion down below in the comments. Thank you once again to the RPG Sage, and everyone have a good evening.
Take care.